This is Wee Freemen, Chapter 14, Part 2, and this will actually be the end of the book. It was all a bit of a dream. Tiffany found that a very useful thing to say. It's hard to remember. It was all a bit of a dream. It was all a bit of a dream, but I just can't be certain. The overjoyed Baron, however, was very certain. Now, obviously, this queen woman, whoever she was, had been stealing children, but Roland had beaten her. Oh, yes, and he helped those two young children get back as well. Her mother had insisted on Tiffany's going to bed, even though it was broad daylight. Actually, she didn't mind. She was tired, and she lay under the covers in that nice pink world, halfway between asleep and awake. She heard the Baron and her father talking downstairs. She heard the story being woven between them as they tried to make sense of it all. I mean, obviously, the girl had been very brave. That was the Baron speaking. But, well, she was 9, wasn't she? And didn't even know how to use a sword, whereas Roland had had fencing lessons at his school. And so it went on. There were other things she heard her parents discussing later, when the Baron had gone. There was the way that Ratbag now lived on the roof, for example. Tiffany lay in bed and smelled the ointment her mother had rubbed onto her temples. Tiffany must have been hit on the head, she'd said, because of the way she kept touching it. So, Roland with that beefy face was the hero, was he? And she was just like this stupid princess who broke her ankle and fainted all the time. Well, that was completely unfair. She reached out to the little table beside her bed where she put the invisible hat. Her mother had put down a cup of broth right through it, but it was still there. Tiffany's fingers felt very faintly the roughness of the brim. We never asked for any reward, she thought. Besides, it was her secret, all of it. No one else knew about the Wee Freemen. Now, admittedly, Wentworth had taken to running through the house with a tablecloth around his waist, shouting, "Wee mens, I'll scone you in the boot!" But Mrs. Aiking was still so glad to see him back, and so happy that he was talking about anything other than sweets, she wasn't paying too much attention to what he was actually saying. No, she couldn't tell anyone. They'd never believe her, and suppose that they did and went up and poked around in the Pixies' mound. She could not let that happen. What would Granny Aiking have done? Granny Aiking would have said nothing. Granny Aiking often said nothing. She just smiled to herself and puffed on her pipe and waited for the right time. Tiffany smiled to herself, and she slept, and she didn't dream, and a whole day went past. And then another day. On the 3rd day it rained. Tiffany went to the kitchen when no one was about, and she took down the China Shepherdess from the shelf. She put it in a sack, and then she slipped out of the house and she ran to the downs. The worst of the weather was going on either side of the chalk, which cut through the clouds like a prow on a ship. But when Tiffany reached the spot where an old stove and 4 iron wheels stood out on the grass, and cut a square of turf, carefully chipped out a hole for the China Shepherdess, and then she put it back in the turf. It was by that time raining hard enough to soak in and give the turf any chance of surviving. It seemed like the right thing to do, and she was sure she caught the whiff of tobacco. Then she went to the Pixies' mound. Now she worried about that. She knew they were there, didn't she? So somehow going to check that they were there would be sort of showing that she doubted that they would be, wouldn't it? They were busy people. They had lots to do. They had an old Kelda to mourn. They were probably very busy. That's what she told herself. It wasn't because she kept wondering if they really might be nothing down there, but rabbits in the hole. It wasn't that at all. She was the Kelda. She had a duty. She heard music, and she heard voices, and then sudden silence as she peered into the gloom. She carefully took a bottle of special sheep liniment out of her sack, and she let it slide into the darkness. Tiffany walked away and heard the faint music start up again. She did wave at a buzzard, circling lazily under the clouds, and she was quite certain a tiny little dot waved back. On the fourth day, Tiffany made butter and did her chores, but she did have help. "And now I want you to go and feed the chickens," she said to Wentworth. "What is it I want you to do?" "Feed the cluck-clucks," said Wentworth. "Chickens," said Tiffany severely. "Chickens," said Wentworth obediently. "And wipe your nose, not on your sleeve. I gave you a handkerchief, and on the way back you see if you can carry a whole log, okay?" "Ugh, Crivens," muttered Wentworth. "And what is it that we don't say?" said Tiffany. "We don't say the—" "Crivens word," Wentworth muttered. "And we don't say it in front of—" "Front of Mommy," said Wentworth. "Good. And when I've finished, we'll have time to go down to the river." And Wentworth brightened up. "Wee Freemens?" he said. Tiffany didn't reply immediately. She hadn't seen a single Feegle since they'd been home. "There might be," she said, "but they're probably very busy. Well, they have to find another Kelda and, well, they're very busy, I expect." "Wee men say, 'Hit you in the head, fish face,'" said Wentworth happily. "We'll see," said Tiffany, feeling like a parent. "Now please go and get the eggs." When he wandered away, carrying the egg basket in both hands, Tiffany turned out some butter onto the marble slab and picked up the paddles to pat it into, well, a pat of butter. Then she would stamp it with one of the wooden stamps. People appreciated a little picture on their butter. As she began to shape the butter, she was aware of a shadow in the doorway, and she turned. It was Roland. He looked at her, his face even redder than usual. He was twiddling his very expensive hat nervously, just like Rob Anybody did. "Yes," she said. "Look, about, Roland began. "Yes?" "Look, I didn't lie to anybody or anything," he blurted out. "But my father just sort of assumed I was the hero, and he just wouldn't listen to anything I said, even after I told him how helpful I had been," said Tiffany. "Yes. No. He said it was lucky for you that I was there, and—" "It doesn't matter," Tiffany said, picking up the butter paddles again. "Well, he just kept telling everybody how brave I had been, and—" "I said it doesn't matter," said Tiffany, and the little paddles went pat, pat, pat on the fresh butter. "You mean you don't mind?" he said at last. "No, I don't mind," said Tiffany. "But it's not fair." "We are the only ones who know the truth," said Tiffany. Pat, pat, pat. Roland stared at the fat, rich butter as she calmly patted it into shape. "Oh," he said, you won't tell anybody, will you? I mean, you have every right to, but—" Pat, pat, pat. "No one would believe me," said Tiffany. "I did try. Honest, I really did." "Oh, I expect you did," Tiffany thought. "But you're not very clever, and the Baron certainly is a man without first sight. He just sees the world the way he wants to see it," she thought. "One day you'll be the Baron, won't you?" she asked. "Well, yeah, one day, but look, are you really a witch?" "When you are the Baron, you'll be good at it, I expect?" Tiffany asked. "Fair and generous and decent, and you'll pay good wages, and you'll look after the old people. You wouldn't let people turn an old lady out of her house, now would you?" "Oh, well, I hope I—" Tiffany turned to face him, a butter paddle in each hand. "Because I will be there. You see, you'll look up and you're going to see my eye on you. I'll be there, right on the edge of the crowd all the time. I will be watching everything, because I come from a long line of aching people, and this is my land. You can be the baron of it for us, and I hope you're a good one. But if you're not, there will be a reckoning. Look, I know you were, Roland began, going red in the face. Oh, I was very helpful, Tiffany said. Yes, but you can't talk to me like that, you know. Tiffany was sure she heard, up on the roof and on the very edge of hearing, someone say, "Ugh, Crivens, what a wee little snotter." She shut her eyes for a moment, and then, heart pounding, she pointed a butter paddle at one of the empty buckets. "Bucket, fill yourself," she said. It blurred and then sloshed, and water dripped down the side. Roland stared at it, and Tiffany gave him one of her sweetest smiles, which could be quite scary. "Now, you won't tell anyone, will you?" she said, and he turned to her, his face pale. "No one would believe me," he stammered. "Aye," said Tiffany. "So we understand each other then. Isn't that nice? Now, if you don't mind, I have to finish this, and I need to make a start on some cheese." "Cheese? But you can do anything you want," said Roland. "Yes, and right now I want to make cheese," said Tiffany calmly. "Go away." "My father owns this farm," said Roland, and then realized he said it out loud. There were two little but strangely loud clicks as Tiffany put each of her butter paddles down. "That was a very brave thing you just said," she said. "But I expect you're very sorry about it now, aren't you? Now that you've had a really good think." Roland, who had his eyes shut, nodded his head. "Good," said Tiffany. "Today I'm making cheese. Tomorrow I may do something else, and in a while, maybe, I won't be here, and you're going to wonder, where is she? But a part of me will always be here. Always. I will always be thinking about this place. I will have it in my eye, and I will be back. Now go away." And he turned and ran. After his footsteps had died away, Tiffany said, "All right, who's there?" "It's me, mistress. Not as big as medium-sized Jock, but bigger than wee Jock, mistress." The pixie appeared from behind the bucket and added, "Rob anybody said we should come to keep an eye on you for a wee while and to thank you for the offering." It's still magic, even if you know how it's done, Tiffany thought. "Only watch me in the dairy, then," she said. "No spying." "Och, no, mistress," said not as big as medium-sized Jock, but bigger than wee Jock, nervously. Then he grinned. "Fion's going off to be the kelda for a clan over near Copperhead Mountain, and she's asked me to come along as Gonagle." "Oh, congratulations." "Aye, and William says I should be fine if I just work on the mouse pipes," said the pixie. "And, yes," said Tiffany. "Well, Hamish says there's a girl in the Long Lake clan who's looking to become a kelda. I mean, it's a fine clan she's from. The poor pixie was going violet with embarrassment. "Oh, good," said Tiffany. "Now, if I was Rob anybody, I would invite her over right away." "You dinna mind?" asked not as big as medium-sized Jock, but bigger than wee Jock, hopefully. "Not at all," said Tiffany. She kind of did a little bit, she had to admit to herself, but it was just a bit she could put away on a shelf in her head somewhere. "Oh, that's grand," said the pixie. "The lads were a bit worried, you ken. I'll run up and tell him no. And he lowered his voice. And would you like me to run after that big heap of jobbies that just left and see if he can fall off his horse again? No, no, said Tiffany hurriedly. No, don't do that. She picked up the butter paddles. You just leave him to me, she added, smiling. You can leave everything to me. When she was alone again and she finished up the butter, pat, 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 she paused, and she put the paddles down again, and with the tip of one very clean finger, she drew a curved line on the surface, with another curved line just touching it, so that together they looked like a wave. And she traced a third flat curve underneath of that, which was the chalk. Land under the wave. She quickly smoothed the butter again, and she picked up the stamp that she'd made yesterday. She had carved it very carefully out of a piece of apple wood that Mr. Block, the carpenter, had given her. She stamped it onto the butter, and she took it off carefully. And there, glistening on the oily, rich yellow surface, was a gibbous moon, and sailing in front of that moon was a witch on a broomstick. And she smiled again, and that was Granny Aching's smile. Things would be different one day. But you had to start small, like oak trees. So then she went to make the cheese, in the dairy, on the farm, with the fields unrolling, and becoming the downland sleeping under that hot midsummer sun, where the flocks of sheep, moving slowly, drift over the short turf like clouds on a green sky, and here and there sheepdogs sped over the grass like shooting stars, forever and ever, world without end. That's the end of the book.